Margaret slams the empty bowl at Clara's feet and orders her to work without food. Clara does not argue. Her hands shake, but she lifts the basket as if obedience might save a scrap of dignity. Margaret watches her, waiting for submission, demanding it with silence rather than insults. The empty bowl is louder than any slap. It tells Clara she is worth less than waste. Jonathan glances toward the scene, pretends the cruelty is routine, and signs a ledger. His refusal to intervene tells Clara everything. Her existence is labor. Her hunger is entertainment. Margaret leans down. You earn food? You haven't earned anything. Clara nods, though her body begs her to fall. The dizziness feels like floating. Every command hurts more because it is delivered without emotion, as if starving someone were no more meaningful than folding cloth. Margaret pauses, letting the power settle. Do you understand me? She asks. Clara whispers, barely audible, yes. Margaret straightens slowly, satisfied with how small Clara sounds. She kicks the bowl aside with her shoe, not violently but casually, as if ending a conversation. Ruth stands at the doorway, frozen. She wants to speak, but she knows where defiance leads. Margaret enjoys quiet cruelty, and silence in a house like this makes pain invisible. Clara bends to lift the basket. Her fingers slip once, twice, before she grips. Margaret studies her shaking arms like watching an animal she owns fight gravity. Clara's breath stutters. Jonathan clears his throat, not in protest, but annoyance at the interruption. He closes the ledger and murmurs, "Don't delay the day, like hunger is schedule, not suffering." Clara turns. Margaret blocks her path for one more moment, examining her face. You don't get pity here. You get results. Clara swallows air, because she has nothing else to swallow. Hunger is a second master, pulling at her bones. She nods again. Speak, Margaret demands. Clara meets her eyes. I'll work. Margaret smiles, the kind of smile that appears only when someone has been effectively broken. She steps aside. Clara walks. Her legs argue with every step. She keeps her back straight, because collapsing would become a spectacle Margaret would enjoy. Every inch forward is a fight between the floor and her heartbeat. Ruth steps forward when Margaret looks away, whispering, Clara. But Clara shakes her head, a tiny motion. She won't let Ruth pay for compassion. Margaret notices the gesture anyway. Ruth, she says without turning, tend to your own tasks. This one made her choice. Ruth steps back like she touched a hot iron. Her fists close at her sides. Clara reaches the doorway, basket digging into her shoulder. The empty bowl stays on the floor like a mock gravestone, marking the moment Clara's needs stopped mattering to anyone except the one too powerless to change it. Margaret watches her leave, satisfied by the silent obedience. To Margaret, hunger is proof of control. To Clara, hunger is proof she must survive without hope. And both women understand that today, work replaces food and silence replaces worth. Clara's knees give way without warning. Jonathan hears nothing. He is focused on his account books. Margaret doesn't rush to help. She waits like a hunter watching an animal decide whether life is worth fighting for. Stand, I didn't excuse you, Margaret says. Clara tries. Her arms shake as if her bones have rusted. Every breath scrapes her lungs. She rises halfway before collapsing again. Margaret steps closer, not with concern but curiosity. You have work, she repeats. You will finish it. Clara breathes through her teeth. Hunger feels like knives pushing from the inside. She lifts her head and forces her palms under her weight. Her fingers claw the floor without purpose. She's not searching for balance. She's searching for strength she doesn't have. Ruth takes one step toward her, but Margaret raises a single finger, a warning sharper than a blade. No help, Margaret says. If she wants to live, she stand on her own. Jonathan flips a page, ink scratching like a verdict. Don't interrupt the count, he murmurs, as if Clara on the floor is an inconvenience. Not a human being dying in front of him. Clara tries again. Her elbows lock, tremble, then give. The collapse is silent. Her body folds the way fabric folds when dropped. No scream, no plea. Margaret kneels beside her, not to comfort, but to inspect a broken possession. Your body is failing, she says. Your will shouldn't. Clara's lips move. No sound? Margaret leans closer. What did you say? Clara forces words like dragging stones through her throat. I will work. Margaret smiles, not kindly but triumphantly, as though the sentence is a signature on a contract she never allowed Clara to read. Then stand, Margaret whispers. Clara's hand slips under her chest again. Bones press skin. She pushes. Her arms tremble so hard they look like they might snap. Her eyes blur until faces become shapes. Margaret is a dark shape holding power. Ruth is a pale shape holding fear. Jonathan is a still shape holding indifference. She gets one knee under her, then the other. Her head drops, chin touching her chest. Margaret doesn't help her rise. The point is that Clara must choose pain, so Margaret can choose pride. Straighten. Margaret orders. Clara lifts her spine an inch at a time. Her breath is a soft rasp. When she finally reaches standing height, her body sways like it might fold again. Margaret watches the struggle the way some watch music. With privately enjoyed satisfaction. Ruth covers her mouth. Clara's hands hang uselessly at her sides. Shaking in invisible rhythms, Margaret's voice is calm. You see? Hunger is not death unless you allow it. Clara's silence answers everything. It isn't obedience now, it's absence. Her fear burned out. What remains isn't strength or courage, just a numbness Margaret doesn't recognize, the beginning of something she can't control. Margaret turns away, satisfied. Jonathan never looks up. Clara walks again, each step a decision her body disagrees with, each breath a negotiation with the day, and Margaret believes she won, because Clara stood, not knowing that collapse is the first step of transformation, not defeat. Jonathan drags the barrel closer, ignoring how Clara's hands tremble. Lift it, he orders. His tone is flat, like assigning a task to a tool. Clara touches the wood and almost collapses again. Her fingers barely grip it. Jonathan steps closer, not to help, but to enforce the command. Lift it, he repeats. She tries. Her back strains. The barrel rises a few inches before gravity defeats her strength. She coughs, swallowing air instead of food. Jonathan's expression doesn't change. This house doesn't pay for weakness. He says. Clara's knees slide on the boards. She wipes her mouth with the back of her hand, though nothing is there. The gesture is habit, trying to seem composed when she's barely alive. Margaret watches from the stairs. She likes seeing Jonathan deliver her cruelty. It validates her power. She doesn't need to raise her voice or soil her hands. Command flows downward, through others. Again. Jonathan says. Clara tries again, because failure means nothing good. The barrel moves higher this time before dropping. Her hands scrape open, but she doesn't wince. Pain is normal. Jonathan steps around her. I should sell you, he says casually. At least someone else might find use for you. Margaret tilts her head. She won't survive anywhere. Her tone isn't sympathetic, it's evaluative. Like she's discussing livestock. Ruth stands behind a pillar, covering her mouth. She knows the truth. Clara is dying, and everyone here will pretend it's discipline, not murder by hunger. Jonathan doesn't look at Clara directly anymore. He looks at the barrel, like the object matters more than the person failing to lift it. Try again? Clara obeys, though her body is past its limit. Her breath is ragged, uneven, as if her lungs no longer understand the rhythm of living. She leans forward and hooks her fingers under the edge again. Her nails scrape the wood like she's trying to dig into it. She lifts, not enough to succeed, just enough to hurt herself. Her shoulders tremble, and her spine curves until she looks folded in half. The barrel rises, her arms shake violently. And then it falls. The thud echoes. Jonathan places a boot on the rim, trapping it in place. Get up, he says. Clara tries. Her legs hesitate, like they're waiting for permission from parts of her body that no longer exist. Margaret shifts her weight on the stairs, unimpressed by the slowness. I don't understand the hesitation, she says. If she wanted to live, she'd lift it. Ruth flinches. She knows Margaret believes it. Starvation isn't cruelty here, it's logic. If Clara doesn't survive it, that proves she didn't deserve to. Clara gets to her knees and tries to stand again. Every movement is a negotiation with pain. Her eyes don't show desperation, just calculation. She's choosing damage because not choosing it is worse. Jonathan steps behind her. Not to assist, but to loom close enough that refusal would feel like defiance. Lift it, he says. For the fourth time, Clara wraps her arms around the barrel like she's trying to hold on to something that's slipping out of her life. She pulls upward. Her jaw clenches. Tendons stand out in her neck. The barrel rises an inch, then two, then drops. Her legs simply stop responding. She collapses beside it, breathing like she's drowning on land. Jonathan doesn't react. Margaret doesn't blink. Ruth steps back so no one sees her cry. No one helps Clara up. Clara lifts the barrel halfway. Her strength disappears. She falls, not gently, but like a body with nothing left inside. The sound is final, a dull collapse that ends the argument between command and biology. The barrel rolls an inch, then settles beside her like a companion too. Heavy to carry. Margaret walks toward her and steps over her like Clara is a dropped cloth. No pause, no acknowledgement. Her skirt brushes Clara's shoulder as she passes. The gesture is not careless, it's intentional. Stepping around her would suggest Clara still occupies space that matters. Jonathan turns away, ashamed only of inconvenience. His sigh isn't grief, it's irritation that the day now requires adjustments. He closes the ledger, tapping dust from its corners like the numbers are the only thing worth preserving. Ruth kneels. But Margaret stops her with a look sharper than iron. She finished her work, Margaret says. That is all that mattered. The words aren't cruel in her mind. They're sensible, practical, consistent with a belief system built on ownership. She sees death as the end of usefulness, not the end of a person. Clara's eyes are open, but unfocused. They look at nothing and everything at once, reflecting a ceiling she will never see clearly again. Her lips move without sound. She tries to speak a name, maybe her own, maybe a memory. Margaret doesn't care enough to listen. Jonathan rubs his temples. We'll send for someone to move her. I have meetings. His tone implies this is a maintenance issue, a problem to clear before guests arrive. He doesn't look at Clara's body. He looks at the space it occupies, planning its removal. Margaret crouches, studying Clara as if inspecting a broken object. Her face shows mild curiosity, the way someone might examine a cracked plate they forgot they owned. You should have worked harder, she whispers. The whisper isn't emotional. It's the final entry in a ledger, an evaluation of output. If Clara had value, she would be alive. If that logic absolves Margaret of responsibility, the cruelty is casual, the kind born from believing a human can be reduced to labor. Clara's breathing slows. Her chest barely moves, like she's trying to leave quietly so no one will complain. Ruth holds her hand anyway. Breaking the rule because the dying deserve witnesses? Her fingers shake as she wraps them around Clara's. The warmth is fading fast. Ruth stays there. Knowing Margaret sees the disobedience and chooses not to act, punishment can wait. Clara's final breath is barely there. Only Ruth sees the tear slide from her eye. It moves slowly, trailing over skin hardened by work and hunger. The tear isn't dramatic, it's instinct, the body's last confession that it wanted to live. Margaret doesn't look back. She rises and dusts her hands as if the act of crouching near Clara dirtied her. Jonathan tells a servant to handle it without specifying how. They've removed the humanity from death so completely that details no longer matter. Clara dies without ceremony, and that becomes Margaret's first mistake. The house believes this moment ends here. It doesn't. Clara's death is a quiet fracture in a system built on silence. Ruth feels it, a crack in obedience that might spread. Everyone else walks away. Ruth stays. Margaret declares Clara dead and orders her to be taken away. Margaret stands over Clara's body, indifferent. She's dead. Take her away. She doesn't kneel, doesn't check for breath. The statement is enough. When Margaret declares something, it becomes fact in this house. Jonathan nods, irritated by the disruption rather than the death itself. He pinches the bridge of his nose like, someone interrupted his accounting. The command travels through the house like a rumor. Doors open halfway. Feet shuffle. No one asks who died, they already know. Two workers arrive, lifting Clara without care. Her arm drops, lifeless, hitting the floor before they adjust their grip. Ruth flinches, the small sound of flesh meeting wood cutting deeper than a scream. "Don't waste the day over this," Margaret says. "There's work to be done." She steps aside, not like someone making space for a body to pass, but like someone avoiding mud on her shoes. Jonathan returns to his desk, signing papers on ledgers, financial matters, nothing human. His pen moves with more effort than he gave Clara's life. Ruth watches the removal like witnessing a secret crime disguised as routine. Everyone performs the ritual of indifference perfectly. No eyes meet hers. They know if they look at Ruth, they'll see the truth, and truth is dangerous here. Margaret orders the floor scrubbed where Clara fell, as if erasing the stain erases the guilt. She doesn't look at the mark. She only sees the inconvenience. "Yous lie," she adds. Already walking away, she doesn't notice Ruth staring at her with something close to hatred. Ruth doesn't blink. She wants Margaret to feel the weight of her gaze. Even if she ignores it, Clara's body disappears through the back door, carried like furniture being moved to storage. The path takes her behind the property, into a shed where unwanted things rest until someone remembers to bury them. Tools, broken crates, discarded cloth, and now a woman. No prayer. No family? No name spoken? The silence becomes the ritual. Margaret dusts her hands as though finishing a chore. She walks through the hallway without breaking her posture, already thinking about lunch, fabric orders, and the social visit she plans to attend. Death doesn't interrupt her day. It never has. Jonathan calls for tea. His voice has no weight to it. The house answers the living even when the dead still lie on the ground outside. He writes numbers beside names of shipments, calculating profit. Clara's name is nowhere on the page. Hours stretch. Sun moves. The stain on the floor fades under aggressive scrubbing. The evidence disappears faster than Clara's memory. Far from the house, Ruth stands alone near the shed. She whispers Clara's name, once, quietly, promising something she can't explain. The promise is not shaped by words. It's shaped by anger that feels like grief sharpened into purpose. She touches the door, holding her palm against the rough wood. As if touch might carry meaning where language cannot, she feels the weight of injustice, settle like iron and something else, a presence. A breath in a place that should have none. A promise of return. For the first time, Ruth doesn't feel alone. Ruth hears Clara's voice whisper her name, though no one is there. Ruth freezes. "Ruth." Clara's voice isn't loud, it's close. Not echoing. Speaking, it sounds like the breath someone uses to share a secret directly into the ear. Ruth turns, expecting someone hiding, a person crouched behind the fence. A worker trying to scare her, a cruel game Margaret might stage to test loyalty. Nothing. Her breath quickens. Her body feels heavy, like she has been pulled into the moment without permission. She isn't afraid. She knows the dead don't whisper unless something was stolen from them. "Ruth," the voice repeats. A whisper wrapped in grief. Not anger. Not accusation. Grief so thick it feels like weight. Ruth closes her eyes. "What do you want?" she asks. She listens for footsteps, branches moving, someone breathing nearby. Nothing. Silence stretches long enough that doubt starts to form in her mind. And right when she considers she imagined everything, words arrive so softly they sound like Clara's final breath. They don't bury truth. Ruth's hands shake. The sentence has no threat, only certainty. It carries the weight of someone who kept a secret, suffered for it, and now refuses to take it into the ground. Clara didn't die empty. She died holding something. Something Margaret feared or never knew she should fear. Ruth opens her eyes. The shed stands still. The door hasn't moved. The daytime quiet feels unnatural now, like the house is holding its breath to hear the reply. Ruth's pulse beats like someone knocking from inside her chest. "What truth?" she whispers. No answer, but the silence is different. Not empty. Listening, Ruth realizes Clara is not returning for revenge alone. She is returning to finish something that began long before her death. Ruth does not know the details, but she understands the shape of injustice. It always hides beneath things that look ordinary. She kneels beside the shed wall and presses her hand against the wood, the same way she did before. "I will help you," she says. "Speak when you are ready." She waits again. Silence. Then she feels it, not sound, but presence. Like someone resting their palm against hers from the other side. Warm, familiar. Ruth breathes through her fear. Clara's presence is not vengeance yet. Its memory refusing to fade. The whisper returns, fragmented, like words pulled from a breaking dream. "You saw the bowl." Ruth nods slowly. "I saw everything." The air grows still. Clara's voice fades, but the echo of her existence lingers in Ruth's mind with perfect clarity. Not haunting, insisting. Ruth doesn't understand the full truth yet, but the message is clear. Someone must speak for Clara. Or Clara will speak for herself. Ruth stands, wiping her hands on her dress. She looks toward the house, the windows, the walls, the rooms where cruelty pretends to be discipline. She knows Margaret is about to learn the difference between obedience and injustice, and that Jonathan will learn what happens when he signs ledgers instead of saving lives. Ruth steps forward, whispering back, "I hear you." And the air moves just once, like acknowledgement. The presence withdraws, not gone, only waiting. Clara will return when Ruth is ready to understand what truth Margaret tried to erase. The whisper may be silent now, but Ruth knows the truth clearly. Clara's death was not the end. It was the beginning of something Margaret cannot control. Margaret spins around when she hears Clara repeat the words she spoke before dying. Margaret hears her own cruelty thrown back at her like a mirror. "You should have worked harder." The voice is Clara's, same breathless tone, same whisper Margaret leaned into dying ears. Margaret drops the papers in her hands and spins around, expecting Ruth, Jonathan, anyone, but finds nothing. The room is empty. Her confidence collapses faster than Clara's body did. "Who said that?" she demands. Nothing answers. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Only her own words echoing back, spoken by a dead woman who shouldn't have a voice. Margaret's throat tightens. She recognizes the cruelty more clearly now than when she spoke it. The sentence sounds different coming from the victim. "You should have worked harder." The second repetition comes sharper. As if the speaker wants Margaret to understand each word, Margaret steps backward like the air itself is pushing her. "Show yourself," she orders. No one moves. Her eyes dart to the corners. She expects trickery, someone hiding, a worker imitating Clara, but the voice isn't mocking her. It's accusing without needing emotion. She realizes the horror isn't in the voice itself. It's in the fact she knows exactly when and why she said those words. Margaret raises her chin, trying to rebuild arrogance from fear. "You're dead," she says, as if the statement will erase the voice. Silence answers her, a silence that feels like agreement and contradiction at the same time. Margaret blinks fast. Her hands tremble. She turns again, scanning the floor, the hall, the doorway. Ruth stands there, watching. Margaret didn't hear her approach, and the sight of another person makes her panic burn deeper. Ruth's expression is calm, too calm for someone witnessing madness. Margaret sees judgment in the silence. "You," Margaret snaps. "Are you playing games?" Ruth shakes her head once. "I didn't speak," she says. Margaret hears how weak her own breathing is. She forces her voice to steady, but it cracks anyway. "She said something. You heard it." Ruth doesn't answer the question directly. "I heard you," she replies. "Years ago?" Margaret flinches. The answer is sharp, a reminder that cruelty doesn't vanish because death removes the witness. Margaret opens her mouth to deny everything, but the memory of Clara on the floor, whispering air instead of words, steals the lie from her throat. Jonathan enters from the hallway, carrying a ledger. "What is happening?" he asks. Margaret points at the empty space behind her. "She's here." Jonathan laughs once, a short, dismissive sound. "You're exhausted," he says. "You should rest." Margaret shakes her head violently. "No, you didn't hear her." Jonathan looks at Ruth, expecting support. Ruth doesn't give it. She keeps her eyes on Margaret. Not accusing, just recognizing the shift. Margaret's fear is the first true emotion she has shown in years. Jonathan steps closer to Margaret, lowering his voice. "You're letting guilt invent ghosts," Margaret whispers back. Guilt doesn't speak. Ruth finally steps forward, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes it repeats what you never apologize for." Margaret stares at Ruth, unable to respond. The terror isn't about spirits, it's about realizing Clara didn't die silently. Every cruelty Margaret dismissed as discipline now sounds like a confession spoken aloud by the dead. Margaret trembles, not from belief in ghosts, but from the realization that a voice she tried to erase returns stronger than her authority. Clara has come back, not for comfort, not for violence, but to force the truth out of someone who used silence as a weapon. Margaret grips her own wrist, trying to stop the shaking. "She wants something," she whispers. Ruth answers without hesitation. "She wants what you took?" Jonathan looks between them, confused. He doesn't understand that guilt becomes a threat when the victim carries truth beyond death. Margaret presses her hands against her mouth, holding in a sound she didn't expect, a sob more from panic than grief. Clara's presence isn't violence. It's judgment, and Margaret knows she deserves it. Jonathan drops the glass when Clara's silhouette appears behind Margaret. It slips from his fingers like the weight of it went missing, and it hits the floor hard enough to snap the room out of its practiced civility. The shatter isn't clumsiness. His hand didn't tremble. It froze. The noise is a confession. Behind Margaret stands the outline of a woman, not flesh, not phantom. A shape made of absence. A memory taking form with cruel precision. A stance carved into Jonathan's mind the day she tried to lift that impossible barrel, shoulders pulled forward, elbows taut, refusing to collapse even when she was starving. "Clara?" he whispers. The name tastes wrong in his mouth. Shame arrives before reason does. Margaret turns, sharp and instinctive, but she sees nothing. That emptiness exposes him. Jonathan's face reveals more than he speaks. He's staring at a woman he allowed to disappear. Margaret sees only the empty air where his fear is looking. Jonathan backs away, like he just discovered a house he built has a basement full of bones. A man proud of his order suddenly realizing order can be cruelty disguised as discipline. He looks at the floor instead of Margaret. Eye contact is dangerous now. It might make the guilt real. Clara's silhouette lifts its head. Not dramatic. Just the simple motion of someone who still suffers hunger hours after death. The posture is enough to crush breath out of Jonathan's lungs. "You killed her," he says. It isn't accusation. It's confession disguised as blame. Margaret snaps, because truth spoken publicly is humiliation, not revelation. "You starved her with me. Don't pretend innocence now." The silhouette fades, like a candle blown out from inside. But it doesn't vanish. It leaves its outline inside Jonathan's mind, burned into his memory like sunlight into photographic glass. The room feels smaller. The air feels thicker. Pain can take up space. Jonathan sinks into a chair, fast, graceless, like the structure of authority in his spine finally gave out. For the first time, his posture breaks into that of a man who sees consequences as inevitable rather than avoidable. His hands cover his eyes. Not to cry, to hide. Ruth steps into the room, slow, deliberate, like she's entering a courtroom she never trusted. She's not surprised. She's patient. Her calm isn't mercy. It's the confidence of someone who's watched cruelty ripen over time. "You both left her to die," she says. "Now she stands where you least expect her." The sentence lands clean. No raised voice, no moral lecture, just fact. Ruth speaks like someone who knows justice doesn't need spectacle. It just needs honesty. Margaret looks behind her again, desperate to see what Jonathan saw. Not because she wants the truth, but because she needs something to deny. She finds only fear. Not Clara's, her own. Jonathan doesn't look up. He doesn't argue. He doesn't defend himself. Silence is the first ethical thing he's done, and for a moment, the room holds three versions of Clara, the memory Jonathan sees, the absence Margaret fears, and the truth Ruth refuses to bury. Margaret screams Clara's name as the dead woman reveals the secret she died carrying. Jonathan promised me freedom. Clara's voice pierces the room. Low, but unmistakable. Margaret's scream is raw. Not from anger alone, but from betrayal clawing into her chest. The words dig deep. Freedom wasn't a story, a lie whispered to calm hope. It was real. Jonathan had signed papers, made a promise, and Margaret had been complicit in keeping it from her. You lied, Margaret hisses, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury, directing it at Jonathan. You let me starve her knowing she believed you. Jonathan trembles, the ledger in his hand shaking. His eyes flick to the floor, to the ceiling, to nothing, but he can't hide from the weight of what Clara is revealing. His shame is laid bare, no courtroom, no witness, just the unwavering moral force of the woman he starved. Returning from beyond the grave to name his guilt, she signed her own despair with my lies, he mutters under his breath. The words are more confession than explanation. Clara whispers again, patient and precise, each syllable a sharpened reminder. He signed my papers. You burned them. Margaret's knees buckle. The scream she thought would summon obedience now brings no control. It dissolves into sobbing fury. A trembling acknowledgement that the life she manipulated and dominated was stolen not just from Clara, but from herself too, because her cruelty failed to erase the truth. Ruth steps forward, hesitant but firm, her voice calm against the storm. She told me once she believed her life would change, Ruth says quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. You made sure it didn't. Margaret's hands clench at Jonathan's chest, pushing, shaking, as if force could shift the moral gravity he now cannot escape. You destroyed everything for what? Jonathan says nothing. He can't. His gaze is empty, haunted, following shadows that exist only to remind him of his failure. He feels Clara's eyes in every corner of the room, sees the echo of her life in the weight of silence, and cannot move, cannot answer, cannot justify. Clara's presence doesn't need violence. It doesn't strike. It illuminates. Every whispered word, every faint echo is a blade sharper than any physical force. She is justice rendered intangible, unstoppable. Her silence is louder than screams, her truth heavier than chains. Margaret finally collapses, pressed into the floor, sobbing, shaking, trembling. She is aware now that the power she once wielded was never hers. It was borrowed, stolen, and returned with interest. The house holds its breath. Jonathan cannot avert his eyes. Ruth's hands are still, witness to both terror and revelation, and Clara lingers. Not to punish with her hands, not to exact cruelty in flesh, but to expose the lie that defined her death, the betrayal that made her vanish into silence. Every corner, every shadow carries her testimony. She was promised. She was denied, and now her truth cannot be erased. Guilt devours faster than hunger. Margaret realizes it fully. She feels it coil inside her like a living thing, growing stronger with every echo of Clara's whispered words. There is no escape, no bargain, no deflection. The lie that killed Clara has returned to consume its creators, and the room, heavy with confession, is suffused with the presence of justice beyond death. Margaret screams Clara's name as the dead woman reveals the secret she died carrying. Jonathan promised me freedom. Clara's voice pierces the room. Low, but unmistakable. Margaret's scream is raw. Not from anger alone, but from betrayal clawing into her chest. The words dig deep. Freedom wasn't a story, a lie whispered to calm hope. It was real. Jonathan had signed papers, made a promise, and Margaret had been complicit in keeping it from her. You lied, Margaret hisses, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury, directing it at Jonathan. You let me starve her knowing she believed you. Jonathan trembles, the ledger in his hand shaking. His eyes flick to the floor, to the ceiling, to nothing, but he can't hide from the weight of what Clara is revealing. His shame is laid bare, no courtroom, no witness, just the unwavering moral force of the woman he starved. Returning from beyond the grave to name his guilt, she signed her own despair with my lies, he mutters under his breath. The words are more confession than explanation. Clara whispers again, patient and precise, each syllable a sharpened reminder. He signed my papers. You burned them. Margaret's knees buckle. The scream she thought would summon obedience now brings no control. It dissolves into sobbing fury. A trembling acknowledgement that the life she manipulated and dominated was stolen not just from Clara, but from herself too, because her cruelty failed to erase the truth. Ruth steps forward, hesitant but firm, her voice calm against the storm. She told me once she believed her life would change, Ruth says quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. You made sure it didn't. Margaret's hands clench at Jonathan's chest, pushing, shaking, as if force could shift the moral gravity he now cannot escape. You destroyed everything for what? Jonathan says nothing. He can't. His gaze is empty, haunted, following shadows that exist only to remind him of his failure. He feels Clara's eyes in every corner of the room, sees the echo of her life in the weight of silence, and cannot move, cannot answer, cannot justify. Clara's presence doesn't need violence. It doesn't strike. It illuminates. Every whispered word, every faint echo is a blade sharper than any physical force. She is justice rendered intangible, unstoppable. Her silence is louder than screams, her truth heavier than chains. Margaret finally collapses, pressed into the floor, sobbing, shaking, trembling. She is aware now that the power she once wielded was never hers. It was borrowed, stolen, and returned with interest. The house holds its breath. Jonathan cannot avert his eyes. Ruth's hands are still, witness to both terror and revelation, and Clara lingers. Not to punish with her hands, not to exact cruelty in flesh, but to expose the lie that defined her death, the betrayal that made her vanish into silence. Every corner, every shadow carries her testimony. She was promised. She was denied, and now her truth cannot be erased. Guilt devours faster than hunger. Margaret realizes it fully. She feels it coil inside her like a living thing, growing stronger with every echo of Clara's whispered words. There is no escape. No bargain. No deflection. The lie that killed Clara has returned to consume its creators, and the room, heavy with confession, is suffused with the presence of justice beyond death.